is the question that I get all the time, and I am sure you get all the time. What's the minimum investment? How much do I have to invest? And I always tell everyone, whatever it costs to get the business operational, or $100,000, whichever is more. But I'm going to start a marketing company online. I only need a computer and like 2 desks. I'm like, well, you're not going to get an E2 for $12,000. So you can just forget that. What do you say? What do you recommend to your clients? And as a consular officer, what were you looking for?
Yeah, again, I feel like a broken record saying that it has to make sense, right? So, as an attorney, we've gotten cases approved with a $30,000 investment, provided that it is, that there isn't very much overhead, that, it is really just an IT type business that doesn't have that kind of initial investment that's required. And as long as you can make that make sense to the officer, right, that this really is enough to start the business, I think you have a shot. I also think it does depend a little bit on geography and what country you're coming from, because again, the officer is going to wonder if this is all you're investing and it isn't successful on 30,000, what do you have to come back to? And I think your argument that what you have to come back to, if you're from, a place like Germany or the UK, or, a place where you probably have something to come back to, maybe arguably easier case to make than if you're from, Bangladesh or Pakistan, right? Like, I think that does play a role in the initial investment amount too, because, the officer's looking at the full picture but yeah, I would say, I know there's all kinds of things saying less than, more than 100, or I hear 50,000 a lot in my practice. People say, I've heard that the, sweet spot is 50. I mean, it really varies. It has to make sense for the business type, in my opinion. But yeah, I think anything less than 30 or 50, you're going to have a really difficult time, and there's other factors that play a role in that too. But yeah, I think you've got to again tick that box, and if it's real,
and
tick that box.
The thing that I always say to my clients, I usually require that they have at least 100, because to me, that's kind of, there's like a mental break there. Like, it's like, wow, that's substantial, right? Because you've got the 3 pieces to the substantiality. One's proportionality. Okay, that one's fine, whatever. But then the other 2 about your commitment to the business. And is this enough to get the business really going? Right. So those are the 2 for me that kind of put me in that category, because I also think about the officer, right? What if they've just had 10 interviews in a row that everyone invested 200, and then you're coming through with 55? It's like, that's also something to me to take into account. You don't want to be the like, oh, I actually approved someone for the lowest amount today. Like, you don't want to be that person. That's my thought. But it's interesting to hear that. So as a consular officer, what kind of stuff were you looking for as far as amounts? And I know there's not like a golden amount, but what were you, in 2 minutes that you were reviewing this, what was something that would be like, this isn't enough, or like, I totally get it?
Yeah, again, that's where that, the attorney cover letter and the business plan is so important, because if that can explain it, how has the amount been spent, and what has it been spent on, and where is the business at now? Again, that all goes back to if you're buying a already established business, if you're setting it up from scratch, like, where's the money going, right? And as long as the officer can understand that in that 1 or 2 minutes, right, that the business is operational, because you've invested this money, then okay, that makes sense, right? But it is, yeah, I mean, in my private practice, I always submit all the receipts and everything, because that's what you're kind of thinking the officer is going to look at, right? And it's what it says on the website that you should submit, right? But on the inside, the officer may not look at all that, but yet they're going to flip through that, right? So if they can, see that the big purchase was, you spent $5,000 on whatever, on a computer or whatever the case is, right? Okay, your IT business, that makes sense. If you have a contract for the software development, and you've got, that's another big ticket item. I think I always tell people in my private practice, like, you want to highlight those big ticket items, again, for the officer to understand, how the money's been spent, and understand that quickly, and if those are the bare bones of what it takes to set up the business, then, that'll make sense to the officer. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not, yes, they look at the overall investment, but also, how it's been spent is important too.
Right. Yes, definitely. I had I had a client, this is years ago now, and this is an example that I always give to everyone that is, I said, okay, well, average for like a startup would be around 100, something like that. And then he goes, oh, awesome, because I just bought a Tesla and it was 120,000. And I was like, okay, but that's a car, not a business, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta have a few things, right? And I tell people that I find myself saying that all the time, like, okay, that's a box of t-shirts, that's not a business. Like you need a few different things to show, like, oh, I have an office, I have a couple of computers, I have some inventory, I have some storage, I have some, like set up a business. Don't buy a car. That's not really a business, that's a car, right?
Exactly. Yeah. When I was first trained, the office space was a big thing that the officers were trained to look at, right? And so I think that's changed a little bit with COVID and people working more remotely and businesses not really requiring to have so much the business place. But when I was trained like if the business says they're going to employ 20 people in year 5, on day 1, they should have an office space that accommodates 20 people. Well, businesses just don't operate like that, right? So now with, co-working spaces and that type of stuff, like it seems like officers are accepting that. But I mean, that's a conversation I always have to have with my clients, because they're like, but we don't need an office space. Why do we have to have an office space? Well, the officer is still probably going to look for that, even though times have changed.
Yes, Anna, yes. I get that all the time too. And I get it. But a lot of times too, with the office space. So first of all, I 100% agree with you. Like, even though this is the other thing, even though the language has changed, like you might be dealing with people that were trained 15 years ago. So that's number one. And you don't know. I mean, you're not going to know till the second you walk up to that window. Number one. Number two, it's not that big of a deal, because it's like people are, oh, whatever, it's like, okay, it's $600 a month. You're spending $150,000. Just do it. Number two. Number three, for some, especially for some of the service-based industries, I would say make some connections to the United States. If everything's online all the time, like, why don't you just run it from London? Why don't you just run it from Paris? Why do you need to be here? Like, establish those connections to the United States so they can see you've got something going in the United States, other than just like, oh, I have a website and I want to live in LA. Like, okay, but that's not really what this is for, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that, especially in London, that was a big concern. I think I mentioned before the call, like we had a supervisor that was really apprehensive about giving older people visas, because they thought that they were using the E2 visa as a retirement plan, right? So if you're in that kind of situation where you think it would just be great to live in Miami, but you're really not going to run the business, I mean, be prepared to really be scrutinized about that, because they've got to have something to as evidence that it is a legitimate business and that you are going to actually operate an entity once you get there, and it's got to be a full-fledged business. Yeah, 100%.
Anna, I have loved this conversation, because some of my kind of crazy ideas have been justified, which I really love. But I also love that you corrected me on something that I tell clients, which is the yes/no question. So that's good to know. And you told me another shocking fact. How many you do in a day, which I knew there were a lot, but I had no idea it was that many. That's a lot. So it even emphasizes how important it is to have an attorney to help you condense. I think that's our biggest job as attorneys, is to tell the story in a very simple way. And that's a little bit trickier than you think when you have somebody. I just had a case I filed 2 weeks ago, last week, maybe, more than 600 pages. And it was in Toronto, so I could only do 70. So that's tough. It's not easy. And so anyway, I love all of those tips. Fantastic. Anything else that you want to add that maybe we didn't ask? And we're definitely doing this again, by the way, because I have like at least another hour's worth of questions, but I don't want everybody to get super crazy bored, and I don't want to like bother you too much today. But anything else like you would kind of give as I don't know, something we didn't talk about that you feel is really important for people to know going to these interviews?
No, I mean, I think we covered all of the main kind of what I consider to be stumbling blocks, for people. So I think, I think we covered kind of all the hot topics, in my opinion.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, I have so many more hot topics, Anna, that we will cover on another day. That's another discussion for another day. But so to the audience out there, thanks so much for joining us. Again, this is Anna Kerner Anderson, and she is an immigration attorney and former consular officer. And I'm Angie Rupert of Rupert Law Group. And we would love to help you, combined, separately, in any way. Anna and I do know each other, and we work on cases together, and she has given me some amazing advice for some of my clients. And so please reach out anytime. We'd both be happy to help you. And thanks so much for joining. Anna, anything else?
No, thank you. Thank you very much for listening to our advice.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anna. We hope to do it again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.